Radio is enjoying a record audience in Ireland at the moment. So again, grounds to be hopeful, and I think that's where we start. It obviously has qualities that have allowed the medium to endure and to thrive for so long, and hopefully those qualities we can retain into the future. Chris, if you were to pick out what makes radio great, what's at the top of your list?
A few things, Will. I think when you come here today, you do start to think about it, and some of these numbers have been mentioned, and I think the first thing is just the amount of people that this industry engages with on a daily basis. 3.4 million people is just absolutely phenomenal. There are industries that would absolutely kill and brands that would kill to engage with that many people on a daily basis, and I think we need to just respect and understand the value that our industry plays engaging with that many people, and it's true connection. Those people choose to come to our radio stations, to our products, and that's before they listen to a podcast, visit our social pages, do anything else. So it's a really phenomenal bit. And then I still get such a kick. I was on the way here in a taxi today, and I made a phone call. I mentioned Radio Days, and the next minute the taxi driver says, "Do you know Ciara Kelly, do you?" And I said, "I actually do know Ciara Kelly." And it's that bit that is still exciting. It's still got that bit that resonates with people. They want to know about the personalities. They want to know the magic of how it happens, and they always love that bit when somebody says, "Did you hear?" And that still rings true today, be that in a podcast, digital audio, and radio. It's a very, very special industry to be involved in.
Well, James had talked about live and local and perhaps real and relevant being a different phrasing. You run 2 local stations, Ronan. Talk to us about the community values that you hope will see radio continue into the future.
I think the big plus local radio has is we're so entrenched in the local community. The people that feature on our news are our listeners, the people that play in matches we commentate on, our listeners. Fortunately, the people on our debt notices are our listeners, which isn't good for business. But we're entrenched in all aspects of the business. I think we're attached to our listeners, they're accessible. I mean, it's rare that we would contact someone to ask them to become involved in something with the radio station and say no. And likewise, it's rare when someone comes to us that we can't look after them in some way or another. So I think we're entrenched in the community, and we're just a small part of the ecosystem in that community. So very strong, yeah.
Sean, we've been looking at it through a listener's lens, a community lens, commercial partners. We wouldn't be here without them. What makes radio great?
If you look at the commercial proposition and the kind of old thinking on commercial opportunity, or slightly dated at this point, is around the low cost, high reach, high impact value of radio. But I think the world has moved on so much since then. The seismic change that our landscape of radio has endured in the last 5 years even has been just enormous. And I think it is really leaning into the digital space. It's really leaning to the power of digital audio. And I think we need to understand the complementary benefits of the mass reach of linear broadcasting and how that complements so well with the targeted segmentation of addressable digital audiences as well. And I think the two work hand in glove in lots of ways. And, I was reading some research, was it maybe the week before last, from Radio Centre UK, The Speed of Sound it was called. And it, for all intents and purposes, the message that I took from it was one singular piece, which was the future of our sector is in multi-platform. That is where we need to live, and thankfully that's where we need to live, because we launched a brand in my part of the business yesterday, which kind of leans into that space around new services, new digital products, new distribution platforms, which is going to be critical for our organisation. But I actually think it reaches much more beyond that to this sector into the years ahead. I think it's one of these ones where that particular piece of research says that multi-platform is the way to go, and basically says that the multi-platform will maximize reach and also amplify impact for advertisers. So I think if we can combine both of those elements, which is the linear and the digital piece, that's where we need to lean into. The only other one for me around commercial is around the area of trust, and I think we've heard many times the sector, and we repeat regularly the Reuters Institute of Journalism and the stats that come through there around the value of trust and how trusted a medium we are, and in particular in the linear space, how broadcast audio is a very trusted medium. But one thing I've never actually seen is the value of the word trust. Commercially, is it actually more valuable to us to be in a trusted space? Likewise, purely in terms of research, do our audiences actually believe that we create better and more compelling products in a trusted environment. You would imagine commercially, in a brand safe environment is where they always want to be. But I'd like to see the pure commercial value of something like that linked into a bit more in terms of research that I haven't even seen across the world, quite frankly, at this stage. So that's another element for me.
That's an interesting point, because often the currency for advertisers would be reach and share and all of those metrics. But if radio advertising is inherently more trusted, then it could be more valuable as well. Patricia, trust in the editorial sense, and we've seen, as John referenced, the Eurobarometer studies again and again, radio tops that list. What is it about radio that makes it so trusted in your view?
Look, I think it's partly to do with the human connection that's been talked about, albeit that there's 3.4 million people listening every day. There's, it's a very intimate medium, and people trust the personalities that are on the stations that are delivering the messages to them. I think it's been mentioned already about misinformation and disinformation, but like in a world where everything gets divided into black and white, there's an awful lot of grey in the middle that needs to be pulled apart. And I think radio has a really important role to play in actually doing that and in helping people understand the complexities of the world and in I suppose, navigating through that era of misinformation.
Now, Aoife, until recently, until your appointment, you would have been external, and I'm curious, with fresh ears, what perspective can you bring to why radio will endure?
Well, yeah, I'm relatively new to the sector, and thanks everybody for the welcome I've had. And I'm really excited about it, actually, because what we're hearing today and what I've experienced over the last 8 months has been, a very dynamic sector. I've just been through the process of signing a lot of new commercial contracts where many of you in the audience, who, signing up for 10-year commitments to future service provision in radio, enhancing services. We're really delighted to support the DAB trial that's being launched, and the diversity of new services that are coming through in that trial, I think, is really exciting and interesting. So I think there's just a really wide range of dynamic initiatives going on in this sector, which we're here obviously as a regulator, but also in our media development role. So we're here to support that development. And the Minister talked earlier about the government support for funding initiatives, and that's something that is a huge focus for us now as we look not just at the future of promoting journalism and trusted journalism in Ireland, which is so important, but also hopefully by the end of this year, a digital innovation scheme to enable broadcasters and radio stations to take advantage of some of the innovation that's available and really look at the alternative platforms that are there. And you can really see that happening in the sector at the moment. So it's been fantastic for me to come into it.
So those are some of the great qualities of radio. We acknowledge there are challenges, and John Purcell touched on, from a regulatory point of view, the desire for a level playing field, the funding model being disrupted. Ronan, most people in the room may be from local radio stations. Certainly they're the greatest in number. What regulatory and policy issues would you point to today?
Yeah, I suppose the big one for us is fairness. I think you can't just look at radio in isolation. You have to look at it in the world that we live in. We compete against other mediums for commercial revenues, and for many years that was sufficient. We were able to challenge on that. But the market has got completely distorted of late. If you take social media, digital takes well over half the market, and they don't play by the same rules that we do in terms of verification of content or advertising. RTE, and I think it was really good that RTE got the funding they got last year, but they now have the really good position where they have funding on a multi-annual basis. They have certainty in terms of their operations. They can apply it to news and current affairs, but in particular for hundreds of millions, they just give broad commitments on broad criteria at the start of the year and report back at the end of the year. If you look at press, who are commercial companies like our own, they would have been given the benefit of reduction in VAT from 9% to 0%, which is worth, according to their own figures, about 38 to 40 million in year one. And again, the critical part of that was there was no conditionality around that whatsoever. They were given that to secure the future of newspapers in Ireland, and they were trusted to go and do what they want with it. And then you move on to us, and we have sound and vision and future media schemes. And there's a lot of hoops to jump through in those, that some have been covered already. But the real issue is it's not even driving money after that. And if you look in the last 12 months, we've had 3 sound and vision rounds, 53, 54, 55. I think about 850,000 went to directly to an independent radio station from that, about 4%. If you look at the future media scheme, 0%, 5.7 million available, 0% went to an independent radio station. So out of funding of about 27 million, we got about 3% of it. So,
although to be fair, radio stations didn't apply
no,
for
absolutely.
journalism schemes because they felt they were
yeah,
unfit for purpose.
but I think again the reason we didn't apply is the future media scheme. You just couldn't apply for it if you were an independent radio station. It was just so badly designed you could not even apply for it. You couldn't get past that stage on it. So I think the issue we have is at a time when we got about 25 grand per station, press would have got about 35 million. And we have conditionality around our bit. They have no conditionality around most of theirs. So I think if we're serious about funding, we spoke about, the public service we provide and all that. And I think James's presentation really showed that the future is not about the music, it's about the content, it's about the personality, it's about the bits that are driving the public service elements.
Which is the most expensive to produce.
Which is the most expensive bit, and I think that comes down to money. So I think we have a really bright future if the financing is right. And I think particularly at a local level, financing probably is a challenge to do it from our own means at the moment. But I think you have to look at what's happening elsewhere, and I think we're completely disadvantaged against everyone else in the market.
Patricia, you are originally a creature of the commercial sector, only recently moving over to RTE, and I'm sure many people are curious, how do the two cultures compare when it comes to money in and money out?
I suppose, look, they're very different in lots of respects. I mean, just in terms of scale of organisation and that kind of thing. Obviously, we have certainty around funding now, which is really important. And I think everyone in this room would support the need to maintain a public service broadcaster like RTE. And indeed, we would support the need to maintain public service outside RTE as well. So they are different. But I think there's lots of similarities as well. And I think on an optimistic note, like RTE, like the independent sector, is full of kind of passionate people who are really energetic about radio and about audio and about creating amazing content to create connections with audiences. And I think that's a real opportunity for the industry, and that maintaining that is really important. But I think that's how we can all move together, I suppose, as an industry to really encourage audiences to stay tuned to this medium and to audio as a whole, which I think is really important as well, that we have to lean into audio, embrace audio. The fact that podcasting and audio has become such a popular medium is actually a great compliment to our medium, and we're the experts at it, we're brilliant at it, and we're the best storytellers in the world. So I think it's up to us to lean into that, to go to where audiences are, to be where they are, to understand what they use radio for and what they use audio for and what they use podcasts for, and to really tailor our products and our content to them.
Well, we've referred a lot to digital platforms today, and while yes, there is a funding question to be answered, how can we help ourselves? So for instance, in an age of instant analytics, Sean, is JNLR still fit for purpose?
JNLR gets a bashing, let's call it as it is. But some of that, in my view, is unfair. It is the single largest piece of independent research in this country. And just because it is what it is, in some ways it carries the same kind of a tag as radio in itself, and that we've now become a tired and stale and dated traditional media, when in actual fact I believe we're anything but. So sometimes perception is not reality, albeit JNLR, like any other thing, can develop and can work towards that digital space into the future. Some of the restrictions, naturally enough, are that it's not real-time data, and that there are delays, and that there are nuances within the research in itself that, throw out fluctuations in listenership results on an ongoing basis, and it kind of evens itself out, you would hope. But those challenges, I think, exist in that methodology, but perhaps they exist in all measurement methodologies. And I know the JNLR committee, and Chris actually is part of the JNLR committee, maybe he'd like to comment as well, but from my perspective, the current process to tender for the new term of the JNLR is capturing a number of suggested improvements around the area of, could we, for example, link in connected device listening, which we all have access within our own services, into the JNLR and actually move it towards that real-time data space. It's difficult, but panels, people monitors, diary questionnaires, door to door, like it's it's all in a space where you're going to pick holes in it if you want to. I mean, I think the single strongest thing that we can say about Jane Law is it is independent and it is large.
Do you want to build on that point, Chris?
Yeah, like I'd echo a lot of what Sean says. I think Jane Law is not something that's ever criticised until somebody asks something about it, which means it's deeply reliable. It's delivered by a really well-regarded research company since the inception of radio in Ireland, and it's remarkably stable. And I think some people can concentrate on some big-ticket numbers. If you delve into it, it does show that the younger end of audience are not listening. It's not hiding it. Those numbers are in there. As Sean said, there's technology out there like passive people meters. There's other things that can be done. I can tell you now, the industry here will not bear the cost of going into passive meters, and it will have challenges in certain franchise areas and stuff around the country. What I do think we will see over the next iteration, and I'm not prejudging, is a bit of what Sean has touched on, is that kind of solid survey that is conducted in the current format for Jane Law, hopefully supplemented by some digital listening data. And I think in the next period of time, the committee and the industry needs to look at the collection method. One of the big things that comes up is it's on a doorstop, it's pen and paper. And it's not a good look, it doesn't feel modern. There's actually challenges in moving to collection, be that CAPI on iPad or whatever it is, and the committee are going to investigate that. But for now, I think it is definitely the most solid piece of work. I think if you go and look at the UK, there's been some moves, with some changes in it, but ultimately they're still dropping a version of a diary on people's doorstep, which sounds, if you think door-to-door, day after aided recall is ludicrous, leaving a diary in a house for a week or a number of weeks on occasion seems equitably ludicrous to me. And there are some strong things happening across the world, particularly in territories like Australia, that I think we can learn from here, and hopefully that will come out in the next iteration of the Jane Law, starting from 26 onwards. So, yeah.
So, Aoife, you've heard so far an industry that is standing by the survey, but scaling into digital platforms more and more, trying to duck and dive, but there is still that funding challenge. And the Minister mentioned earlier some of the legislative hold-up and the committees not being in situ, but is the Commission working on how these schemes may operate when eventually the green light is given?
Absolutely. I think, just to say on sound and vision, I think something like 12.7 million has been provided for 438 radio projects since 2020. So there's like real scope there, and that will continue on. We're really open to engaging with industry on what works and doesn't work in those schemes. We want them to be successful. We want them to support high quality journalism in the radio sector in Ireland. Once we have the legislation in place, I think we'll be looking at how do we align the schemes as well with our strategic outcomes, and it was the kind of things the Minister was calling out there, supporting democracy, like that's really important, and so that's what we're looking to do. I think it is fair to say that there's some aspects of the schemes that we can definitely learn from, what worked, what didn't work, what we can change. And there's some aspects that are dictated by EU requirements that really are going to be very difficult to change. But maybe what we need to do is collaborate on how we address those rather than trying to, magic them away. Like really they're there, they're requirements. We have to address them in some way. But I think this is a very creative sector. There's got to be ways that we can demonstrate the additionality of the funding schemes in a way that also works for the operation of commercial, independent, local, and increasingly community radio. So that's something that we're really working on now as well, and look forward to the ongoing engagement with yourselves.
With Sound and Vision, and I'm sure many people in the room will have been part of Irish Music Month, and that's an example of an initiative we'd like to run probably every year. Is there any prospect of multi-annual funding for projects like that?
Yeah, look, I think we'll always be working with government exchequer funding cycles, and in fairness to the politicians, they have to be able to make decisions come every October, and so we'll be working within that. But hopefully we can build up confidence, over time in our ability to continue to deliver funding for what are clearly successful programs. but perhaps won't be at the stage where we can absolutely guarantee certain funding for certain initiatives. And also, these things do need to evolve and change over time. It is a dynamic industry. What works for a year, 2 years, 3 years, might need to evolve into something different. So we also need to be able to hold open the opportunity for greater diversity in the opportunities we fund.
So James earlier touched on the challenge with younger listeners, Chris, and you have some brands right on the vanguard of that, iRadio, The Spins, Beat. So what strategy are you deploying to try and recruit those younger listeners?
We operate the kind of younger stations in the market, and they're not immune to this problem. The average age of the audience on the 15 to 34-year-old stations is creeping older, and it's something we've known for quite a while. I think in Bauer we've been very proactive over the last period of time. We know they're not going to naturally just arrive into radio. That day has moved on a little bit. We're deploying all the tools in our arsenal to attract those people to audio. That is through social media, digital and video more increasingly, but we're spending and investing over the next period of time multi-million euro in terms of our digital audio product, particularly in relation to on-demand, which James touched on earlier. So taking the stuff that's broadcast on the radio, making better use of it in the future, but also creating new product to attract that audience. And that's something we've had really good success on over the last number of years. Just to mention a couple of things that we've done across the group. So things like Talking Bollocks, Hold My Drink, Mark Megan's Weekly Roast, etc. These are products we may never have ever put on the radio for fear they would not work, they wouldn't fit with the audience, they wouldn't fit with the regular schedule. These products have all found a huge audience. They're getting hundreds and thousands of listens a week. They're commercially successful with sponsors, commercially successful with Spot. The guys are selling out 2 nights in Vicar Street in the next month. It's nationwide tours. It's created a whole different model for us in terms of how we attract audience. And it's not cannibalizing our audience. The radio audience is staying relatively stable broadly, in some of the stations thankfully growing, but we're building this whole other audience. And what we're doing within our ecosystem, and you can see some of the announcements in the industry yesterday, which I think should be welcomed, is that view to keep people in the ecosystem, get them joining through social, get them joining through video and digital, but also moving them around our ecosystem. And then we have a much better chance, if we have hold of that audience, to push them onto our more established radio brands. Even if that's not live listening, that can happen in on-demand or in podcast. And that's the approach we're taking with attracting a new and younger audience to Bauer and our stations.
I think I missed a trick. I've been on air for 20 years talking bollocks and nobody gets branded it that way.
You're selling out the Gibson wheel, here you are.
Ronan, for local stations, full service, it can be difficult to try and target that younger demographic. And the risk is complacency, that we assume we will inherit when some of Chris's stations, when those listeners outgrow them. Do we need to be more proactive?
Sorry, we always need to be proactive, but I think the problem isn't as big at a local level as people perceive it to be. So take Clare FM and Tip FM, we probably do nothing directly to attract that under 35 audience. But if you take Tip FM, they'll have over 40% of under 35s tuning in every week. So I think, old fellas like us think, this is what young people want to hear, but young people are extremely proud of their local area. They want to hear local sport. They want to find out what's happening in local news. They want to get involved in local debates on radio. So I think it's that content bit is the key to us. I think if we become bland music stations at a local level, there's no reason for them to tune in. If we keep producing rich content, I think we will attract those audiences in huge numbers. I think the youth stations are doing a really good job in introducing people to radio. And I think while some of them are moving on to us, they're happy with the radio environment by the time they do. So I think it's not a huge problem. We need to be cautious of it. But I think it all comes down to content at the end of the day. If we have the right content, people in Clare care about what's happening in Clare. And if we can give them audiences, we do traditional Irish music, for instance, which is a unique one on local radio every night. And again, the engagement in that, huge amounts of young people are engaging with it because it's important to them. So I think it's all comes back to content at the end of the day, yeah.
Patricia, you have a talk radio background, and RTE obviously has a range of brands and targeting different ages, but you saw the slide, how many young people are consuming on their smartphones news and information. So how can we represent or reformat some of what we do to connect with that audience more deeply?
Well, some of it is as simple as James outlined, is using the content more than once, and doing something different with it. But I think it's all about understanding the audience and being relevant to them in their lives at the moment. So I think we need to go out and talk to them. We need to go out and talk to the 15 to 34 audience and even the 34, 44, and ask them what do they want and deliver it to them in the format they want. I would point out that they haven't gone away, There's still a good cohort of 15 to 34 is, listening to radio, and I think it's really important that we acknowledge that and we talk about that, because sometimes, you hear phrases like young people don't listen to the radio. That's just simply not true. They do. But I think we also need to understand that they use radio differently than we might have, and that they definitely supplement their listening with digital audio. So even when they do tune into the linear radio stations, we probably won't get the same time spent out of them as we would have gotten in the past. So therefore, we need to have complementary products. And I think the podcast space is a really fruitful ground for that. And there's loads of space for us to deliver complementary products to the ones we deliver on linear schedules, and ones that are targeted specifically at that audience.
And Sean, of course, very deliberately yesterday rebranding so he could talk about it today. But
A complete coincidence.
the launch of new services on DAB, is that partly to recruit younger listeners?
It's probably more leaning into the multi-platform piece, if I'm honest, in that, and don't get me wrong, there are challenges here, clearly. You lean into a new platform, you lean into new cost base. If, for example, we are sitting on the same audiences now as we have been 10 years ago, we had an FM cost 10 years ago. Now we've got serving costs for our connected audience. We may have DAB cost of transmission, which actually exceeds the costs of FM transmission and the standard FM in itself. So you might be triplicating the cost for what was a singular static audience through that period, or relatively so. So, we need to be careful. But by the same token, I think FM spectrum in Ireland is largely full. If we want to create expansion of choice and diversity of content, we have to be leaning someplace. There are not that many significant examples worldwide of stations making it on IP alone. That's just a fact. So, in the absence of an FM spectrum, it feels like the right place to be.
And Aoife, from a strategy point of view, where do you see the future of FM, of DAB, and of streaming?
This year we're launching our public service media framework review and also a broadcasting services strategy review. So we'll be talking to you all at various stages, but I think some of the questions we're going to be asking is really around the audience, what kind of content they want to consume and how they're currently consuming it, and really think about, the strategy for delivering high quality content, whether it's public service content, news and current affairs, in a format that people are engaging with, and particularly the youth audience. So that's something that we're going to be really focused on, and we think through the tools that we have as regulators, through the new framework for public service funding, through the broadcasting services strategy, through our funding schemes, what we'll be trying to do is support the innovation and support the types of initiatives that will start reaching those audiences more effectively. And that's why we took a very open approach to contracting for the DAB trial, because it is a trial, it is an opportunity to experiment. We do want to see, are there different formats, are there different options that will really engage whatever audience you're looking to reach. But I think that's what's exciting now. There's new options there, and we have to ensure that we're agile and dynamic in adopting them.
Ronan, we're here as a united panel, and at the risk of stirring it a little bit, I hate to do that, by the way, would all stations have the capacity to scale if DAB becomes ubiquitous? Would some local stations find it more difficult to develop the additional brand extensions and swallow the cost relative to the group?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, there was a report, the 010 report, which was done lately on the viability of the sector. I think it showed that all stations were profitable. Unfortunately, what it didn't delve into is what stations were doing to get profitable. And I think particularly at a local level, just significant challenges around staffing, particular challenges around using fair staffing in particular, and a lot of that is led by the amount of money we have to invest in those areas. So I think there's challenges at a local level for investment in a lot of areas, and this area is probably down the line a small little bit for us.
Chris, on the subject of staffing and recruitment, so I know Fionnuala contends radio is a sexy business, but some graduates will come out and they'll see Meta, Google, opportunities and pastures greener elsewhere. What can the industry do to respond to that?
I think some of it is about changing how we present ourselves. I think firstly, the majority of our business or our people are based in Dublin, and I think we historically competed in a kind of a smaller sector. We're now competing in a much wider sector. We've got a lot of people going to work in PR, public affairs, politics, comms, etc., and being the kind of Middle East, North Africa hub for most of the tech companies, the competition for people with our skills is absolutely huge. I think we need to do a few different bits. I think some of the things we're working on internally is genuine upskilling and changing the way titles happen. So I think the day of a researcher and producer and some of those very historic radio titles need to change. I think they need to be more comparable with other industries so people understand their place. I do think we need to consider some changes in how we work, and AI was mentioned here earlier on. I think there can be a fear around AI in this business that it's going to take jobs away from creative people and presenters and stuff like that, and I just don't see that. What I see is the opportunity for efficiency, for the bits of people's jobs that they don't enjoy, that take time, that can be done easier and quicker, for it to be implemented there to allow people to concentrate on what's valuable to them, to our business and to our audience as well. And then also we need to look after our people as well, and I understand that is absolutely easier said than done. I work in a bigger group, but for quite a period of time we had a bit of a laissez-faire attitude in terms of how we looked after people, rewarded them, that kind of health and well-being aspect of it, the facilities we work in. We have to make a conscious effort that if we're going to retain people, we need to look at stuff like that. And again, that's not a magic wand stuff. People don't just wake up with bags of cash overnight and fix everything, but I think we need to make a concerted effort to do that. And then finally, in the last couple of weeks, we've had the transition year week with learning waves in our business, and I know we've had it in a number of them, and I think the stations and our groups need to continue to do that from a very, very young age. Getting people in, showing them the excitement of what they do and what they can achieve is really important, and I think we're very committed to that at a second level and a third level point of view in our business, and it's really starting to pay dividends as well. So no magic wand, but loads of elements there that I think people need to consider. And
no radio GPT on Bauer.
No, yeah. Well, apparently we're getting regulation for it, so it's coming. But no, it's not something. We might talk about AI afterwards, but we're doing quite a few trials internally around processes, how we speed things up, checking scripts for ads and stuff like that, and that's going really well. But again, that's allowing people do more, I don't want to say real work, but stuff that's of more interest and more value to us rather than wasting time. And I think that's a good place to be. It also will help, I think, with retention, because the amount of time people sometimes leave and they're going, I'm doing really tedious kind of stuff. It'd be nice to cancel that out of the exit interview process when people do decide to leave. So, yeah.
Sean, we talk a lot about editorial positions being hard to recruit for, and they are. But sales as well can be challenged, getting people who are resilient and creative. And how do we try and make media sales as attractive as possible?
I probably wouldn't segment it. I think I just use media in that sentence, if I'm honest, that we have certain roles within our organisations that are media specific. That's fine. And then we have roles that are quite transferable outside of the sector entirely. But I think you need to look at it in its totality. I mean, if you look at the work that Learning Waves do, they're always open to suggestion from within station. They're always proactive in terms of lining up courses to ensure that we are a future-facing, an upskilled workforce as much as we can possibly be. I think the difficulty is the entry point. The difficulty is outside of the TY program, for example. How do we get young graduates actually genuinely excited about our sector? How do we tell them there's actually a career, a lifetime career in this for you? A lot of people in this room are here because you've been bitten by the bug. You know what I'm talking about. It's just, if there's 10 grand somewhere else, fair enough, certain people may jump, but trust me, I can point in lots of directions to individuals within my own organisation Onic as it's now called. And
How do you spell that?
I'll give you a lesson there. But it's one of these ones that I think we really need to try and figure out how we can do that. I know Aoife within the Commission, there's a media education division being suggested as part of the Commission. I just wonder, is there some way that we can look to tap into that and tap into, the broader sector here to try and understand how we can actually encourage people to join our sector and to not, it's not about competing with Google and Facebook. It's about actually coming into a real vibrant, creative, genuinely rewarding space where no 2 days are the same, where there's a passion and a vibrancy and an enthusiasm that each of us actually live for on a day-to-day. And I think, you'll hear that throughout today. I'm quite sure you'll hear that throughout tomorrow. We are media. We are the original media natives in lots of ways, not digital natives, media natives. And I think if we could crack that, I look around the room and there are pockets of youth at one point where that might be a little dangerous. But I'd love to think that if we were here in 2 years' time, in 4 years' time, that actually there'd be a little bit more representation. Instead of us actually referring to they, when we talk about youth audiences, for example, let's not refer to them as they. Let's say we. Let's understand that, yes, you're not going to have graduates come in and the graduate's going to be running the business after 2 years, right? But let's try and even change our own terminology to ensure that we're with them. We understand what it is, because there's such a gap.
You just want to
such
be
a divide
1534, don't you?
I think we all do. In lots of ways. That mightn't answer your question, but that's where I think we certainly need to start.
Patricia, I remember being at a Learning Waves course, and it was Philip Bromwell and Glenn Mulcahy. And it was about Mojo, mobile journalism. And the moral of their story at the time, and it possibly still holds true, that you have to be agile, you have to be multi-skilled, and you need to embrace all of this change to sustain your career in radio.
Yeah, I think it's important that people are multi-skilled, and I think that's the journey a lot of us are on, that we're working with radio teams that maybe originally just made radio, but now they make radio, they repurpose content for social, they make content for digital. So absolutely, I think upskilling is a really important part of it. I think radio always has been, the immediacy of it, the agility of it, the liveness of it means that the more skilled you are and the more you're able to do that yourself, the better a product you're going to get to air. So I think that is important. On the point of engaging with young people, I don't think they're any less likely to get bitten by the bug, as Sean puts it. I think we just have to get them to the point where they can be bitten by the bug, if you know what I mean. We ran an expressions of interest phase in 2FM towards the end of last year, and the level of interest was unbelievable, and they were all from 15 to 34-year-olds. There was 600 people who came into Radio Centre in RTE who were just amazed and fascinated and delighted to be there, because that meant so much to them, the 2FM building, the radio centre, what would have happened there in the past. And it was amazing, and it was humbling to see, actually, and to see how engaged they could be and how bitten by the bug they could be. And I think we need to create as many opportunities of that as possible to get people in. I've also sat through many a TY Media Week. It's fantastic, and you see people coming in who think radio is this boring old thing that my dad listens to, and then they go out going, hang on a minute, there's video, there's social, there's there's sport, there's live gigs, there's loads of things we can do. And I think we just have to create more and more of those opportunities and outreach to young people at school level and at graduate level that are bringing people in and letting them see that it is a sexy industry, as Fanula so aptly put it.
Aoife, we'll give you the final word, because you've heard from the different corners of the industry, the different stations represented. What would be your takeaways from this session as a regulator?
Well, look, I think we know that this is an industry that is aware that it needs to transform, whether it's public service media, independent commercial sector, and that there's a real energy around that. I hear very clearly they want the support from the regulator in terms of both, the funding, the approach to regulation, and also maybe thinking a little bit around how we engage youth audiences through some of the work we're doing on user education and media literacy. And I suppose one thing I would just say that maybe we haven't talked a little bit or enough about is probably providing diversity in the sector, because if you do want people to engage with you in the way that the Minister spoke earlier today about people wanting to hear their local accent on the radio station, and they engage with that. They also want to see, greater diversity, whether it's gender, racial diversity, LGBTQ. They want to see themselves reflected in the broadcasting media, and I just think that's an opportunity there for us as well that maybe we might explore in later sessions, but that's something that I just maybe encourage more discussion on. So thanks.
Well, to our panel, Aoife, Patricia, Sean, Ronan and Chris, thank you very much.